Good evening and welcome to the October 17th, 2022 Rental Housing Committee meeting. This meeting will be conducted in accordance with California Government Code 54953E as authorized by resolution of the Rental Housing Committee. Please contact mvrent@mountainview.gov to obtain a copy of the applicable resolution. All members of the Rental Housing Committee will participate in the meeting by video conference with no physical meeting location. Members of the public wishing to observe the meeting live may do so at mountainview.legistar.com, on YouTube at mountainview.gov/YouTube, and on Comcast Channel 26. As noted on the meeting agenda, members of the public may provide oral public comments during the public comment period for an item by signing up at mountainview.gov/meeting and entering webinar ID 937-7306-8363. Or by phone by dialing 669-900-9128. and entering webinar ID 937-7306-8363. Any emails received by 5 p.m. today were forwarded to the Rental Housing Committee. Emails received after 5 p.m. will not be read during the meeting, but will be entered into the record for the meeting. Now, I am calling the meeting to order at 7:04 p.m. We will now proceed with roll call.
All right. So we'll go ahead and start with Committee Member Grunwald.
Here.
Committee Member Rosas is absent. Committee Member Almond.
Here.
Committee Member Pardo Dizella.
Present.
And Vice Chair Ramos.
Present.
And Chair Haynes Lindsay.
Present.
Thank you.
Okie dokie. Now we will move on to the consent calendar. And these items will be approved by one motion unless any member of the committee wishes to remove an item for discussion. The purpose of the consent calendar is for the committee to efficiently and quickly consider routine or administrative business items with one motion. Although committee members may remove items, it is generally not intended for the committee to have a lengthy, substantive discussion on the consent calendar items. Would any member of the committee like to pull an item from the consent calendar? Committee Member Parduzella.
3.2.
Which is, telecom meetings, yes. Do we have any other items that we want to pull? Okay. Seeing none, the committee will note that agenda item 3.2 was pulled from the consent calendar. Okay. So last time I did this a little bit out of order. Vice Chair Ramos?
Oh, I was going to, well, actually, we had to do public comment first, but once we do that, I would like to move the balance of the calendar.
No problem. And that's where I was going. I was going to say last time I did this a little out of order. So we're going to do public comment first, and then we'll come back to the committee. Would any member of the public on the line like to provide comment on the consent calendar item? So please click the raise hand button in Zoom or press *9 on your phone. Staff will display a countdown timer on the screen. And we'll give everyone a minute to queue up. Okay, I am not seeing any public comment. So I'm now going to bring the items back to per committee action. We did have item 3.2 pulled, but a motion to approve the consent calendar should include reading the titles of the agenda items or the resolutions attached to agenda items 3.1 and 3.3. Do I have a motion for those? Vice Chair Ramos?
I move to approve the balance of the consent calendar minus 3.2. So to approve the minutes for the September 19th, 2022 RHC meeting and to adopt amendments to the CSFRA Regulations, Chapter 3, Rules of Conduct, and CSFRA Chapter 6, and MHRSO Chapter 7, Upward Adjustments.
Excellent. And do I see a second?
I'll second it.
Excellent. And now we'll do a roll call vote on just the consent items that were not pulled.
All right, we'll begin with committee member Grunwald,
Aye.
committee member Almond,
Aye.
committee member Pardo DeZala,
Aye.
and vice chair Ramos,
Aye.
chair Haynes Livesey.
Aye.
The motion passes unanimously.
Okay. Now, we will start with agenda item 3.2, which was pulled by committee member Paradiso. And this is the item to approve a resolution making findings authorizing continued remote teleconference meetings of the Rental Housing Committee pursuant to the Brown Act provisions as amended by Assembly Bill number 361. And we can open discussion on this item. Committee member Paradiso, do you want to start?
I mean, I would just say there's no state of emergency any longer. And I think at our last meeting, we talked about a hybrid model, which seemed to appeal to a number of members of the committee. And I think that's what we should follow at this point, where we can continue having people allowed to participate remotely by Zoom from the comfort of their homes. And so people can continue to participate that way, but also I think the meetings should revert to how they were always intended to be, which is in person. I believe we have the space available. There's ample room for social distancing, and anyone that feels uncomfortable in that environment can participate remotely. So I can make a motion, or we can talk about it further, but that's what I would like to say about that.
Makes sense. Do we have any other comments on this item? Vice Chair Ramos?
Didn't staff provide us with an update on this? I believe they have, oh, they haven't, so I'll let Anki provide that update.
Yeah, so after last meeting, I did check in with the city clerks and the city manager's office. And the city clerk mentioned that the city council is not ready yet to go hybrid. And committees can go hybrid after the city council has decided to go hybrid. And the reason behind that is that IT is not ready yet, is still tackling some of the problems that come with hybrid meetings. And every month, this question is also posed to the city council, which up till now has continued the virtual meetings.
And can I just interject? I do just want to note that there is still a state of emergency in effect. The governor did announce that it would remain in effect until, sorry, I just lost the date, February 28th, 2023. So we are still under a state of emergency.
Vice Chair Paradiso? Or I'm sorry, Committee Member Paradiso? We can't hear you, you're muted.
I'm sorry. Yeah, if no one else has anything, I'll speak again. Clearly, whether city council is ready for this or not doesn't matter. We're an independent body, and their ability or willingness to participate in in-person meetings is kind of irrelevant as far as we're concerned. I think the only relevant issue is whether, you know, the statutory requirements are met. Apparently, the governor has still imposed a state of emergency, I'm hearing. Obviously leads most of us to wonder when that will ever end, because it seems hard to believe that there's actually a state of emergency still proclaimed. I don't know, maybe I'll ask council, is that a requirement? If there's a state of emergency that our meetings are remote, or does that just give us the ability to authorize a remote meeting? I guess that would be my question for council.
Yeah, it is not a requirement that you hold your meetings remotely, but it does give you the ability to make the findings that are required under the Brown Act to hold your meetings remotely. So the existing state of emergency, both at the state level, and I do believe the city still has not lifted their own state of emergency. So either one of those gives this body the authority to make the findings that are necessary.
Okay. I'm trying to not smile when I hear that there's still a state of emergency being imposed. But so I guess the question then is, I guess can make a motion or not, but my motion would be that we move to a hybrid model as of the next meeting, notwithstanding whatever state of emergency has been created by the governor or the city, and anyone who is unwilling to attend in person or feels uncomfortable is completely willing or able to participate remotely. And anyone that would like to participate in person, as these meetings have been conducted, not just for this committee, but every committee that's existed in California's history up until 2020, we can continue to do so in person. And I'm sure the technical problems, whatever they might be, in the heart of Silicon Valley can be resolved within a week or two until our next meeting. So I guess that's what I have to say, and I'll defer to other members that want to say something.
Okay, so I think we have a motion out there, but Committee Member Almond, do you have something to say?
I just had a technical question whether, I guess this is for Anki. Would our IT be ready for such a meeting?
I just mentioned that I got the message that IT is still working on that and they will not be ready in 2 weeks.
No, I mean if we
For
were
November,
for our November meeting.
correct.
Okay, thank you. You're muted, Nicole.
Muted in the wrong direction. Dang it. Committee Member Partidisella.
Yeah, I just want to know, when do they think they can be ready? So I understand they already had 2 or 3 weeks since our last meeting, and now we're being told there's another 2 weeks. So if 5 weeks isn't enough to get this going, do we have any indication when in the heart of Silicon Valley we can get the technical capabilities to have these meetings in a hybrid model?
I can definitely ask for an update from IT again.
Muted in the wrong direction again. I do have a question. Is there a need for a committee or a group to be willing to test hybrid? Because perhaps we could volunteer to be the guinea pigs, for lack of a better term, so that IT can use us to work out some of the headaches that they may be encountering. Is that
Yeah,
something that?
so again, I'm sorry to repeat myself, but IT also works on the direction of the city manager. So I can definitely ask for an update and ask what their next causes of action are.
Sounds good. So I know we did have a motion to go to hybrid for the next meeting. I think the way that the resolution works, to have this meeting stay virtual, we have to pass the resolution, but we could probably do a friendly amendment to the motion, or if there's no second, the motion will die. So do we have a second to the motion from Committee Member Partidisella? Okay. Do we have any motions around the virtual meetings item? Vice Chair Ramos.
I will move to adopt a resolution to continue virtual meetings pursuant to Government Code Section 54953, which is, I guess, staff's recommendation.
Okay. Do we have a second on that motion?
I'll second that.
Okay, we'll do a roll call vote.
All right, we'll go ahead and start with Committee Member Grunwald,
Aye.
Committee Member Almond,
Aye.
Committee Member Pardo Dizella,
No,
Vice Chair Ramos,
Aye.
Chair Haynes Livesay.
Hi.
Motion passes 4 votes to 1. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Now we will open the meeting for oral communications from the public. This portion of the meeting is reserved for persons wishing to address the committee on any matter not on the agenda. Speakers are allowed to speak on any topic for up to 3 minutes during this section. State law prohibits the committee from acting on non-agenda items. Would any member of the public on the line like to provide comment on non-agenda items? If so, please click the raise hand button in Zoom or press *9 on your phone. Staff will already display the countdown timer on the screen. And I do see one hand from Stephen. Can we advance Stephen into a speaking role?
Thank you. Am I being heard?
We can hear you.
Okay. First of all, I just wanted to say I wanted to compliment the committee for the fact that the situation with COVID, unfortunately, has not even close to been resolved yet. As the CDC has been now indicating, there are far more new variants with significantly different structures that are actually proving to be not very affected by even the most current vaccines. And so, unfortunately, we have about 4 of them that are now in the pipeline. And so I'm like thinking that, unfortunately, we are nowhere near done with COVID. And we have to, again, base our decisions on when we actually can prove that COVID is under control. We currently cannot. The wastewater situation is still moderate to high in Santa Clara County. And that's the reason why both the state and the federal emergency regarding COVID has been continued. I recently saw a report saying that the Biden administration has, in fact, extended the COVID medical emergency order. And so I would suspect that, in effect, that basically pretty much makes it so there's going to not be an end of it until I would say we can prove that the environment, all public environments are safe. Unfortunately, the city council room has very little air circulation, if any, and more importantly, it does not have any means of controlling viral contagions in the air. So I would say that, again, I think that the committee has done a very good job at understanding that. And I think some people need to understand that sometimes things may look on the face good at the moment, but we are definitely under the impression now that there's going to be another new wave of COVID, and it's already started. 11% of the new cases in the CDC nationwide are the new BQ variants, not BA variants. Thank you very much, and have a great rest of your night.
You, Stephen? Okay, do we have any other public comment? Okay, seeing none, we will now move to agenda item 7.1, which is our monthly status reports for September 2022. We will begin with a presentation from staff.
Thank you, Chair Haynes Livesay. Good evening, committee. This evening, we'll be reviewing the monthly status report for the month of September. This closes out our first quarter of the year. As you can see, this is what it looks like right now. The next time that you see this report, so next month when we're reporting for the Q2, it will look different because we will be adding in all of those data points that we talked about. We thought it would make more sense to start at the beginning of the quarter instead of at the end of the quarter. So next month you will see more information on mobile homes pulled out. There's some other data points, including per unit rent and vacancy rates. We'll be seeing a little bit more detail in a few other areas too. So be ready for the changes. We've already had almost 600 public inquiries. A lot of those, as you can see, are still about eviction protections. And we are still seeing quite a few allowed rent increase specific inquiries, and a lot of these have been around concessions and potential petitions. So I did want to pull that out. We are still seeing really high levels of bilingual services. About 30% of all of our inquiries have been in need of Spanish as a primary language. We've also received our first need for Russian support with a petition. So I did want to mention that as well. We were able to provide translation for a hearing in Russian, and that worked out very well for both the hearing officer and the tenant. We've held 9 workshops and had 52 attendees so far. We've had 13 office hours, provided one-on-one support to 147 people. And we've done outreach for where we've been able to reach nearly 1,000 people at our events. So this has really helped us solidify our relationship with the community. We are seeing a lot more, sensitive and serious situations coming through our office from both landlords and tenants. And we have a correlation between the higher touch points in the community and the that type of participation from the community with the services that we're seeing. So that is going well. We've sent out 316 targeted letters. We're going to start sending out targeted letters for people who receive banked increases as well. And as you can see here, we've had 18 email updates for a reach of 913 email subscribers per email. And we will begin starting our Mountain View Voice outreach and probably a few other news outlets as well for our Housing and Eviction Help Center this month. We have the mediation program is still going strong. We've had 47 mediations and conciliations. So far, 36 of those have been resolved. This is pretty high for this early in the quarter. I'll go ahead and do that analysis between quarters or between biannually during our next meeting where we go over outreach efforts. We've received 136 banked rent increases notices, 278 termination notices, 0 tenant buyouts, and 0 additional occupant notices so far this year. And you can see the breakdown of that here. We're going to go ahead and go back further in our reporting of terminations as was requested by the committee when we do the update on the monthly status reports next month. We've seen a slight uptick in failure to pay rent notices. So we're tracking that very closely and making sure that people receive the outreach and support that's necessary to assist them as best as possible during this time. And next month, we'll have data that looks at which one of those are new eviction notices that we're receiving versus which ones are repeats for people who are repeatedly in that cycle. We do have the ability to pull that out, and we will next month. So far for the calendar year, again, this is the calendar year. Everything else for the most part is reported on the fiscal year. No units have gone into redevelopment, no properties have gone into redevelopment, and 2 households have received assistance. And those 2 households are carryovers from prior calendar year redevelopment actions. So we're not seeing any changeover in properties that are resulting in tenants being displaced right now. We have have had 9 tenant petitions so far this fiscal year. So that's quite an uptick for us. 9 in 1 quarter is pretty significant. And we've had 4 for unlawful rent and 5 for tenant hardship. For the market conditions, you can see here, everything is stabilizing pretty solidly. For fully covered units, we have a vacancy rate of 4.4%. For partially covered units, we have a vacancy rate of 4.1%. And for newly built units without coverage, again, that number is always going to be higher, and it's at 16%. When all of that is averaged out, we get a 6.6% across all units vacancy rate. As for market rent, it has recovered past the pre-COVID prices, and we're seeing for fully covered units about $2,700 a month. This is a increase of 6.5% from 2009. And for units sold, we have had 1 property sold for a total of 12 units. 4 properties are on the market for a total of 58 units. And that concludes the monthly status report update for the month of September. Are there any questions?
Do we have any questions? Okay. If there are no questions, I will invite public comment. Would any member of the public on the line like to comment on the monthly status report item? If so, please click the raise hand button in Zoom or press *9 on your phone. Staff will display the countdown timer on the screen. Okay. Seeing none, we're going to bring it back to committee deliberations and providing feedback. I do want to say I'm really excited for the next month's status report because it sounds like we have some really cool new data points that are going to come in. And so I super appreciate all the work, Patricia and everyone, on putting that together, because I'm sure that's a lot of like additional time doing all the layout and figuring out how to do all of that. But I'm super excited about it. So thank you for doing that. Does anybody else on the committee have any comments or feedback to provide on the monthly status reports? Vice Chair Ramos?
I would just like to reiterate the same thing Chair Henslip was saying. I look forward to the next month's data to be collected and shown. I guess it really is. I'm kind of very curious about the separation and separating out of the mobile home park residents so that we can actually have more ingrained data there. That's something I'm excited for. Is it possible to also include compliance with the registry numbers into that? Is that too much, too little, too rough, already being planned?
That was actually part of the plan, was to include the percentage of people who've paid their fees and the percentage of property owners who have registered. That was already a data point that we had planned to include.
Awesome, thank you.
And committee member Greenwald?
Yeah, thank you. I think, Patricia, you mentioned that the volume of petitions has increased recently. If you could go back to that slide. Okay, and what was the, I think you were mentioning that you might do a different cut for the next meeting on this?
We will show the mobile home petitions if any have been received. So.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it'll
thank
still
you.
look like this. This is, I think, shows all of the relevant data points for the petitions, where they're at in the process, and whether or not they've been decided and how they were decided.
Similar to Vice Chair Ramos's ask, it might be helpful to see, and perhaps you already have this in a view, but helpful to see petition volume as type of petition over time. So I mean, this is during the process, but is that already a view? Like, have we received any capital improvement? Any of those petitions recently?
We've not yet received those. We're working on finalizing all of the forms, and then we'll be doing a big outreach push behind that.
Okay, got it. Yeah, do we have, and maybe I missed this, but do we have another view that has petitions over time by petition type?
We showed the petition type for the current fiscal year, but we do track, obviously, that we have that from all of the prior fiscal years. So if you wanted to see it pulled out like that, we could. It would make the report significantly longer, but we can definitely do that.
Yeah, I mean, you're probably going to get a lot of asks, I think, for after the next round of changes for additional asks. So I would just add it maybe to the list to consider. I'd also say for the call volume or information on the first slide, I can't remember if it's called information requests or how we categorize those, but it would be interesting to me, I think, to also put on the list to potentially look at information requests over time. That volume, I know we see it by type, but seeing the general volume by either month or quarter, I think could be interesting for us to just track whether we're getting more requests, fewer requests.
I was planning to start providing that during the annual update for outreach. So perhaps instead of having it in the monthly overview, we can provide that kind of annual look back during that time period.
Yeah, that's great. And again, you're probably going to have a lot of requests. If this would just continue to get longer and longer, so it might, after you've assessed some of those requests and made some of those changes, might be worth having having an agenda item, I think, by the committee to highlight the most important slides or things that we want to track on a regular basis, and then leave the rest for maybe annual or lower frequency. Because yeah, it's going to, otherwise it'll just kind of continue to grow and grow. But I am interested in seeing the new charts that you mentioned.
And we'll definitely do the annual update so that you can see the comparisons between the current and the previous. And then we'll look at, what makes sense to be providing on a monthly data and present that to the committee versus what makes sense to present in an annual format going forward.
Great, thanks.
Their feedback before we move to 7.2? Okay. Seeing none, we will now move to agenda item 7.2. And thank you again, Patricia, and everyone for agenda item 7.1. This is amendments to the CSFRA Regulations Chapter 5, Hearing Procedure, and amendments to the MHRSO Regulations Chapter 6, Hearing Procedure. We will start with a presentation from staff.
Thank you. We'll move to the first slide.
Can you move to the next slide, Patricia?
Thank you. So the purpose of this item, are you guys able to hear me? Sorry, I can't tell if
Yeah.
I can hear you.
Now we can.
I couldn't hear you, but I can now.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you. So the purpose of this item is to review and adopt amendments to CSFRA Regulations Chapter 5 and MHRSO Regulations Chapter 6, Hearing Procedure, to provide processes for determining compliance with final decisions of hearing officers or the Rental Housing Committee. Slide. So just a little bit of background. The CSFRA and the MHRSO both permit tenants to file a petition for downward adjustment in several different circumstances, including um, maintenance issues, habitability issues, as well as the charging of unlawful or excess rent. In addition, the CSFRA and MHRSO authorize the Rental Housing Committee to appoint hearing officers to administer the hearing process on petitions and to make decisions on those petitions after hearing. The regulations that that these proposed amendments relate to are CSFRA Chapter 5 and MHRSO Chapter 6. The hearing procedures require that the hearing officer will issue a written decision within 30 days of the closing of the hearing record. If the decision becomes final, if no appeal is filed within 10 days after the mailing of the decision, if an appeal is filed, then it will go to a hearing before the Rental Housing Committee, which will issue a decision after hearing. And the appeal decision becomes final. The Rental Housing Committee's appeal decision becomes final unless judicial action is filed within the required timeframes. Next slide. So the current regulations don't provide any clarification on a process in case an ongoing compliance dispute arises between the parties after a decision has become final. So examples include where a hearing officer's decision or the Rental Housing Committee's decision requires that the landlord pay back rent, that they restore certain housing services, that they perform maintenance or repairs, or that they comply with registration requirements. And in some, they typically provide a time frame during which the landlord is required to take these actions to come into compliance with the CSFRA or MHRSO. And in many instances, a tenant's rent continues to be reduced during the time that the landlord is not compliant with maintenance issues or habitability issues. In these regulations would essentially provide a procedure by which if there is some sort of dispute about whether a landlord has complied with the final order, it could be brought back to a hearing officer. On the other hand, if there's and it allows both the tenant and the landlord to file for a compliance hearing. So if a tenant says, I'm not paying the rent until you fix this issue, and the landlord says, I've already fixed the issue, a petition can be filed to determine whether the landlord has in fact complied and the rent should be restored. So next. So the proposed regulations would require would permit any party to a downward adjustment petition to request a compliance hearing on a form provided by the program. The requesting party must provide supporting documentation. Within 10 days after the filing of the request for the compliance hearing, Rental Housing Committee staff will send a notice to all affected parties. The affected parties can then object or choose to do nothing. In the case of no objection, the hearing officer will make an administrative decision on the papers. In the case of an objection, compliance hearing will be scheduled, and the hearing officer will hear all of the affected parties' evidence. Next slide. So during the hearing, the landlord has the burden of demonstrating compliance with the final decision, since they were the one that was ordered to do something pursuant to the original order. And the hearing officer issues a new decision, either confirming that the landlord has complied, including the extent and the date of compliance, in which case they can also order that the rent be restored, Or they can find that the landlord continues to be in non-compliance and make adjustments around compliance and provide for other equitable remedies if there are any. The decisions of the hearing officer after a compliance hearing will be appealable to the Rental Housing Committee in accordance with the typical appeal procedures in Section H of CSFRA Chapter 5 and MHRSO Chapter 6. Next slide. So in addition, hearing officers will be required to include in all downward adjustment petition decisions. So this is, we're now going back and talking about the original decision, a requirement of a 30-day notice to a tenant prior to restoration of the rent, as well as information regarding the availability of a compliance hearing process so that tenants are aware of this ability to file for a compliance hearing in case their landlord does not comply with the order. Slide. So staff's recommendation is to review and adopt amendments to CSFRA Regulations Chapter 5 and MHRSO Regulations Chapter 6 to provide processes for determining compliance with final decisions of hearing officers or the Rental Housing Committee. I'm happy to take any questions.
Does anybody have any questions? Okay, I have a question. So now that last part about the 30-day notice, how does that work if does that mean that the landlord has to wait 30 days before they can get the rent back to baseline, even if they comply immediately?
Yes, and that's only because that's a requirement in state law that any rent increase be noted of less than 10% be noticed by 30 days. And so since this is technically a rent increase, then they are required to provide that notice.
So does that create any sort of like gap there where, you know, the petition is, let's say the petition is made, the hearing officer adjusts the rent down for whatever reason, and then the landlord almost instantly corrects it. Let's say that weekend they come in and they fix whatever the problem is. Is the tenant then at risk of, you know, not having paid proper rent? And how does this all go in with like the concessions and everything?
So until the landlord is in compliance with the hearing officer's order, the hearing officer's order will say what the rent is required to be. So in that case, you know, I don't think they will be at risk of not having paid the right rent since they're complying with what is in the order. In the interim, because this requirement is in there that they provide the 30 days notice. Again, I don't think that there's an issue that they haven't paid the proper rent, because they need to be provided the proper notice before they're required to pay that rent. And sorry, I forgot the second part of your question.
So I think when we did the concessions regulation, we kind of teased out that rent reductions pursuant to a hearing officer's order were not really the same as concessions. And so I'm just wondering, are we confident then that the state law around the rent increase really applies here? Because it just kind of seems like we're kind of not on the same in step with what we're saying. We're saying, oh no, those aren't really rent reductions. And then when it comes to the noticing, we're saying, oh yeah, you can't get the original rent for at least 30 days because that was a rent reduction.
I think that they're different. And I think that already hearing officers' orders might require this already. So I don't think that it's a change that is being made. First off, and secondly, I don't think that it's necessarily the same thing. I mean, I don't know, Karen, if you have any thoughts on that question?
Yeah, I don't think it is the same thing as the concession circumstance. And as Nas said, for the most part in the hearing officer decisions, we've said it's been very clear that rents cannot be raised after the reduction without a 30-day notice.
Great. It sounds like if we're already doing it, it's pretty standard then.
Right.
Does anybody else have any questions? Okay. Seeing none, we will now move on to public comment. Would any member of the public on the line like to provide comment on this item? If so, please click the raise hand button in Zoom or press *9 on your phone. Staff will display a countdown timer on the screen. And I am not seeing any hands. Okay. We will bring it back to the committee for possibly a motion and deliberation. So a motion to approve should include reading the titles of the items, which are to adopt the amendment to the CSFRA Regulation Chapter 5 hearing procedure to provide a process for determining compliance with final decisions of hearing officers or the Rental Housing Committee, and to adopt amendments to MHRSO Regulations Chapter 6 hearing procedure to provide processes for determining compliance with final decisions of hearing officers or Rental Housing Committee. Vice Chair Reynolds.
I move to adopt, let me pull this up. Move to review and adopt amendments to the CSFRA Regulations Chapter 5 hearing procedures to provide process for determining compliance with final decisions of hearing officers or the Rental Housing Committee, and to review and adopt amendments to the MHRSO Regulations Chapter 6 hearing procedure to provide processes for determining compliance with final decisions of hearing officer or the Rental Housing Committee.
Excellent. Do we have a second for that motion?
I'll second it.
Excellent. And can we have a roll call vote?
All right, we'll go ahead and start with Committee Member Grunwald,
Aye.
Committee Member Almond,
Aye.
Committee Member Pardo Dizella, might be on mute. Committee Member Pardo Dizella, should I just continue, Karen?
Yeah, why don't you come back to him after you finish the roll call?
Vice Chair Ramos,
Aye.
Chair Haynes Livesay,
Aye.
and I
Looks like
Committee
committee
member-
member Pardo Gisella is unmuted now.
Committee Member Pardo Dizella.
Abstain.
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 Thank you. The motion passes 4 votes and 1 abstention. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. We will now move on to agenda item 7.3, which is the update on the Tenant Relocation Assistance Ordinance and the Housing Crisis Act of 2019, SB 330. We will begin with a presentation from staff.
Hey, thank you. Go to the next slide. So I'll be giving a presentation for you all to receive an update on the activities in fiscal year 2021-22 under the Tenant Relocation Assistance Ordinance, or what we like to call the TREO, and the Housing Crisis Act of 2019, what we like to call SB 330. Okay, so we'll start with a little bit of background. The CSFRA provides for relocation assistance and first right of return to be provided to eligible tenants whose tenancies are terminated based on specific just cause reasons, such as repair, an owner move-in, the withdrawal of rental units from the market, and demolition of rental units.
The tenant relocation assistance ordinance details the eligibility criteria for those tenant households, and it tells us the type of relocation assistance that is provided. On September 28th, 2021, the City Council adopted the Mobile Home Rent Stabilization Ordinance. Following this, the City Council amended the TRAO to provide tenant relocation benefits and first right of return for mobile home tenants. The California Mobile Home Residency Law addresses just cause eviction for mobile home owners and requires its own type of tenant relocation benefits and protections when the park closes or if it changes use. So the Housing Crisis Act of 2019, or SB 330, went into effect January 1st of 2020, and it provides, among many other things, relocation requirements for projects that include the demolition of certain types of existing rental units when there is new housing that will be built. So these types of covered units from SB 330 include units that are covered by local rent stabilization provisions like our CSFRA, units that are subject to affordable housing covenants, units occupied by very low and low income households, so 80% or less of the AMI, and units that were subject to an Ellis Act eviction in the past 10 years. Okay, so next I'm going to review a summary of key TRAO provisions, key SB 330 provisions, and a summary of our current relocation projects and those that closed in the last fiscal year. So we're going to start off by looking at the City of Mountain View's TRAO. And so in order to qualify, or sorry, the TRAO applies to units that are covered by the CSFRA or Mobile Home Rent Stabilization Ordinance, mobile home tenants. And it also can apply to other rental units in cases where 3 or more rental units are vacated on one parcel of land within a period of 1 year. And certain specified terminations would include like withdrawing the rental property, demolition, and other things like rehabilitation of the building or condo conversion. Some more less common things are included in that as well. So in order to qualify for tenant relocation assistance, the households must income qualify. So households are eligible to receive relocation benefits if their annual household income does not exceed 120% of the AMI plus $5,000. So there's a little bit of a buffer on that 120% AMI. And you'll see that in the chart here. It will be the second line of the chart, which shows that 120% plus the $5,000. So for example, a household of 4 would need to make $207,200 or less to be able to qualify for relocation benefits. All right, so if a household does qualify, they can receive the following types of benefits under the TRAO, under the city ordinance. So they'll receive a full refund of their security deposit, except any funds that might be necessary to repair the rental unit if the rental unit is going to be reoccupied prior to undergoing its final renovation or demolition. So households can also receive unlimited access to a subscription service of a rental agency. So it helps them see what are available replacement housing that they can find. They can also receive a cash equivalent of 3 months rent, and that's based on the median monthly rent for similar sized units in Mountain View. So we mostly look there at bedroom size for similar sized units. They'll also qualify for an additional $8,000 per rental unit for special circumstance households, and that's adjusted annually for inflation. So for 2022, we're looking at $8,503 for a one-time special circumstance payment. And in order to qualify for that, you have to have someone in your household that is at least 62 years of age or older, disabled or handicapped, or one or more minor children who are 19 years or younger and legally dependent. So no matter how many of that classification of tenants you have in your household, you only get the special circumstance payments once. So finally, the trail also provides for the first right of return to the rental unit if that original rental unit is returned to the rental market by the landlord or by a successor landlord. So for example, if a landlord terminates a tenant for an owner move-in, the owner lives in the unit for, let's say, 3 years or so, and then returns it to the rental market. They would first need to offer that unit back to the last tenant for their first right to return before they advertise that unit on the open rental market. Okay, so now we're going to switch gears here and talk about SB 330. So SB 330 applies to rental units that are being demolished in order to build new housing where tenants are displaced from certain types of protected units. So I talked a little bit about it earlier, but protective units are residential rental units that are covered under rent stabilization. So again, that includes our CSFRA here in Mountain View. They can be affordable housing restricted to low, very low, and extremely low income. So 80% AMI or less. Units that are removed from the Ellis Act by an Ellis Act eviction in the past 10 years. And those units that are occupied by low or very low income households. So in income that does not exceed 80% of the AMI. So those are the types of protected units. Now, if one of our households fall into that protected classification, they are going to be eligible for the relocation benefits under SB 330, but they also have to income qualify. So in order to income qualify for SB 330, a tenant household cannot exceed 80% of the AMI. And so you'll see that there in the chart here. So again, as an example, if there's a household of 4, you would need to make $131,750 or less in order to qualify for SB 330 benefits. Okay, so now we know if you qualify for your protected unit and you make less than 80% of the area median income, you can qualify for these types of relocation assistance benefits. So the first one is a 42-month rent differential between the lower of 30% of a displaced household's average monthly income or the rent for the unit that is being demolished and subtracting that number from the rent for a comparable replacement unit. So what you would do is you would need to figure out the dollar amounts for each of those 2 categories. And you would take the lower number and then you would multiply that by 42 months. And that's how you get your rent differential there. So you would also receive relocation advisor who would provide one-on-one, really intensive one-on-one assistance in finding replacement housing. And finally, the choice of either a moving cost allowance or reimbursement of reasonable moving expenses. And SB 330 also has the option for first right of return, but it's different than what's under the trail. So SB 330 allows for the first right of return for income eligible households. So they have to be making 80% of the AMI or less. And they'll have the option to rent or buy a comparable unit in the new development at an affordable rent or at an affordable housing price if it's for purchase unit. And so this is different from the TREO where you're only allowed the first right of return from the original unit if the original unit is getting offered back onto the market. Okay, so to make things more complicated, in some instances, both the TREO and SB 330 apply to the same project. So if the property is eligible under the TREO and the household is terminated for property that is going to be demolished where new residential housing is going to be built in its place is also going to be subject to SB 330. And so in the case where both of those things apply, the stricter of the provisions of the two laws is going to apply to that tenant household. So hopefully to make it easier, we have a chart. Okay. So this chart shows the benefits of SB 330 there in the first column. So that's 80% AMI or less. And then the tenant relocation assistance is the 120% AMI or less. So if you're a tenant household, in order to be eligible for both benefits, you have to make 80% AMI or less. If you make above 80% AMI, but less than the trail cap, then you're eligible for the trail column. So I hope that makes sense. And then the shaded areas here are going to indicate where the stricter of the requirements are. And so if both of them are shaded, then a tenant who is eligible for both, so 80% AMI or less, is going to receive both of those things. So they would get the cash payment under SB 330, the 42-month rent differential, because that's higher than the 3 months under the trail. You would get everything in the relocation assistance column under both SB 330 and trail. Since SB 330 doesn't have a special circumstance or a security deposit refund, that would be the stricter of the requirement. And since the first right of return is different under both SB 330 and trail, they would get both of those benefits as well. Okay. So since SB 330 took effect, you can notice a decline in redevelopment projects, which demolished CSFRA covered rental units. That's what we're looking at here. So CSFRA units are considered protected units under SB 330. And another part of SB 330 is that any protected unit must be replaced at an affordable price in the new development. So unless a redevelopment project is constructing a significantly larger number of units than the number that they are demolishing, a lot of times what we've seen is our developers may not consider that project to be profitable, and it might not pencil out for them. So, I mean, you'll just notice there, since 2021, there is one trail project, but it's actually not covered by SB 330. We'll talk about it in a second because they're not building housing. So they only stuck with the standard trail, and we haven't seen any projects in the last 2 years there. All right, so now we'll look at what's sort of going on and ongoing in the redevelopment projects that are affecting our CSFRA covered rental units. So we'll start with 1851 Charleston Road. This one started in 2020. And this project is part of a larger Google project that is to construct the Landings office building. And so there were 4 CSFRA covered rental units at this location, and they'll be demolished in order to construct a parking lot that will provide parking for that new Google office building. So again, this project is only subject to the trail because no replacement housing is going to be built. And this vacate date is currently set for June 1st, 2023. That's the update on that project. The next project we'll talk about is 1919 to 1945 Gamble Way. And so this version of this project started in 2019. And this project is proposing to demolish all of the 29 CSFRA covered rental units. And it's proposing to construct 121 for sale condominium units. So while this project is actually only subject to the TREO because it started before SB 330, as part of the negotiations with the city to purchase that actual street of Gamble Way, they developed benefits that mirror SB 330. So that's why if we go over what the benefits are, they pretty much mirror what you see in SB 330, even though technically this project is only covered by the trail. So an update for this project is that this project has currently been put on hold by the developer due to economic reasons. So the developer continues to extend the final vacate date while they are sort of trying to determine if the project is going to move forward or not. We have communicated that to the tenants at this time, so I just wanted to mention that. The current vacate date is set for January 31st, 2023. But the developer again has indicated that they will continue to push that out if need be. And if the project ends up not moving forward, the original tenants will have the first right to return back into their original unit. Okay, so now let's look at 870 East El Camino Real. So this property consists of 180 CSFRA covered rental units. However, the redevelopment is only proposing to demolish 42 of those total units, and they're gonna, in its place, construct 2 6-story buildings that hold 233 rental units. So that property will become mixed sort of with some old and some new rental units. Okay, so this project is subject to both the TREO and SB 330. So depending on the tenant's income, they might actually be eligible for different levels of relocation assistance. So SB 330 also requires that the 42 demolished CSFRA units be replaced when the new development with rental units that are affordable. And the former tenants that are earning 80% AMI or below will have the first right to refuse or to return to those new units at an affordable rent. So this project was actually just recently approved by the City Council at the end of September. And at this time, there have not been any termination notices issued to those tenants. So we don't have a date for a termination. Okay, so Mariposa. So next we'll sort of take a look at redevelopment projects that have been completed. This one more recently and the other two were in the last fiscal year. So for 660 Mariposa, in 2019, the City Council approved a development project of 226 unit apartment complex at 696 through 1758 Villa Street, so at a different property. So that project was required to include 34 on-site below market rate or BMR units. And then as part of an alternate mitigation plan for providing all of those BMR units on site, the developer actually proposed to the City Council to rehabilitate the 48 naturally affordable CSFRA covered units that are at 660 Mariposa. So the rehabilitation of 660 Mariposa began at the very end of 2021, I think December of 2021. And those tenants were temporarily relocated while the units were being remodeled. So the renovations were just recently complete as of September 2022, and all the tenants have moved back into their remodeled unit. So while this project is not formally subject to the TREO, I wanted to sort of give you an overview of it because it's very similar. So the following relocation benefit options were offered to those tenants at 660 Mariposa. So they could relocate to a comparable newly renovated on-site unit. They could temporarily relocate to a comparable unit at an extended stay hotel that was off-site and relatively close to where 660 Mariposa is. And so they would have no additional cost other than sort of what they were already paying in rent and utilities at their 660 Mariposa unit. Or instead of choosing either of those temporary relocation benefits, they could opt just to get a relocation payment, and then they would be responsible for making their own temporary housing arrangements while the units were being remodeled. So other additional benefits that the tenants received as part of their relocation, their temporary relocation package, is that the developer was going to pay for costs associated with any of the above options, which included moving and storage costs. The tenants would have the first right to return to the original unit once the renovations to their units were complete, unless the tenant wanted to opt to return in or to transfer into a unit that was already renovated. They could do that. And finally, the rents will not be raised until 1 year after the last tenant had returned to their renovated unit. So that's September of 2023 that the rents can be raised. And the rent increases will be implemented in accordance with the CSFRA, but it will have limitations under the Villa project's conditions of approval, which only allow a max rent increase of 4% a year, which is less than that under the CSFRA. All right, next we'll look at 570 South Rangstorp Avenue. So you'll see that one started in 2019 and concluded in 2021. So this project included the demolition of 70 CSFRA covered rental units and the construction of 92 row homes. This project was only subject to the TREO, and the final vacate date was September 30th of 2021. So 40 households who applied for relocation assistance ended up all being eligible to receive the benefits. And these were the benefits as described under the 2018 version of the TREO. So this, they submitted their application just before the TREO was updated. So they got the 2018 version of the TREO. So a total of $617,612 was provided in relocation assistance. And of the 40 households who applied, 27 of those relocated within Mountain View, 11 in the Bay Area, the broader Bay Area, 1 in another California city, and 1 of those relocated out of state. Okay, finally, we'll look at 777 West Middlefield Road. So this project started in 2017 and it ended in 2021. So this project included the demolition of 208 CSFRA covered rental units and is going to construct 716 unit apartment complex. So this project also was only subject to the TREO, and the final vacate date on this project was August 1st, 2021. And so for this project, the developer actually offered enhanced relocation benefits to all of their tenants. So this included at least $10,000 for all households, and $12,500 for households earning between 80% and 120% AMI, and then $15,000 for households earning less than 80% AMI. And this was above the standard 2017 TREO that these benefits were required for. Okay, so a total of a little over $1.8 million was paid to the 150 households who applied for relocation assistance. And of the 150 households who applied, 50 of those relocated within Mountain View, 73 in the Bay Area, 4 in another California city, 20 out of state, and 3 out of country. So that is the end of my presentation. Thank you. Are there any questions?
Committee, do we have any questions? Andrea, I do have a question. When under SB 330, when the housing is noted, when it's purchase housing as opposed to rental housing, and it's noted as affordable, does that mean there's a deed restriction that these are truly affordable properties on the deed?
Mhm.
Excellent. Any other questions? Okay. Seeing none, I will now invite public comments. Would any member of the public on the line like to provide comment on this item? If so, please click the raise hand button in Zoom or press *9 on your phone. Staff will display a countdown timer on the screen. Okay, seeing no hands from the public, we will go into committee deliberations and provide feedback. Remember, no motion is required on this item. It is just informational. Do we have any feedback or deliberations from the committee? Vice Chair Reynolds.
This is a really good presentation. Thank you, Andrea. I knew a lot about these projects and I followed a few of them very closely, but the amount of information, plus essentially the updates of what happened, the Gamma Way one was an interesting thing. I'm really hoping that the tenants there are okay. 777 West Middlefield, I remember when that came down, and that was a not older project, but like a project that was, they started trying to get that project passed before rent control passed. And then they began their demolition at around that shortly after, or went through their final approvals through that. So this is a really good thing, especially I love the breakdown with that, what's SB 330 requirements and our own TRAO requirements. This was really good. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I really appreciate that.
Would agree with that. And I also really like seeing where folks went. I think that was valuable kind of as a wrap up to really see the hard numbers of here's how many folks stayed in Mountain View, here's how many folks went out of state, et cetera, et cetera. Committee member up.
I was just going to echo what Emily said. This is the clearest presentation or documentation that I've seen around TRAO, and specifically about eligibility. And also, I don't follow as carefully as Emily all of the specific developments as they come online. So it's wonderful to have this in print. So kudos to Andrea.
Any other comments before?
Yeah, so I want to emphasize that this is the type of work that our team and mostly Andrea is doing partly outside of the Rental Housing Committee work. Each of these projects are being followed quite intensely, and reporting back to the City Council happens for each of these projects when they get to review and approve these projects. So thank you, Andrea.
That is really wonderful. So Andrea, it sounds like you have no spare time ever at all. From what Anki just said. Well, thank you again. I think that was a wonderful presentation. I think it was truly appreciated by the committee, and I'm glad that we were able, I know we had delayed this item a little bit, but I'm glad we were able to give it its just time today. So next, we will move on to agenda item 7.4, which is the draft Rental Housing Committee work plan for calendar year 2022. We will begin with the presentation from staff.
Thank you, Chair Haynes and Rental Housing Committee. This is an annual agenda topic that will usually be presented to you in the fall. And we asked the Rental Housing Committee to review this draft work plan for the next upcoming calendar year of 2023 and provide feedback to staff, both in terms of the content and also with regards to the timeline. As we've all experienced in the past years, the CSFRA and now also the MHRSO charged the Rental Housing Committee with a great number of tasks. And these include establishing rules and regulations for the administration of the CSFRA and the MHRSO to determine the annual general adjustments of rent, approving an annual budget and rental housing and space fees, and hearing appeals in the petition process, just to name a few. So this draft work plan that is presented outlines a list of tasks and issues the Rental Housing Committee may want to bring forward in their 2023 meetings, either for discussion, consideration, or potential adoption in order to further implement and administer the CSFRA and the MHRSO. And since this is just a blueprint, it's this plan can be adjusted accordingly whenever the Rental Housing Committee sees fit. So the agenda items are divided in different categories. Some of these agenda items are on an as needed basis in case, for instance, when there are appeal hearings, and also when there are regulations that could be considered or revised. As you can see, for next year, we did include the ratio utility billing systems that have been brought up by several members of the Rental Housing Committee, as well as tenant subtenant master lease issues for CSFRA covered units. Then there's the category of monthly items, such as the data reports and the updates to outreach events. Quarterly items, such as the financial updates. And annual items, which will also be part of these annual work plans, such as an annual update of relevant legislation and case law, the election of the chair and the vice chair, preparation for an annual report to the city council, budgets and fees, determination of the AGA, contract renewals, usually at the end of the fiscal year, an overview of tenant relocation activities like the presentation we just received, a meeting schedule, an annual overview of outreach and education, as well as this work plan itself. So we would like for you to review this work plan and provide staff with your feedback, ideas, suggestions, and both in terms of content, but also in regard to the timeline. That ends the presentation.
Do you have any questions on the work plan? Okay. Seeing none, I will invite public comments on the work plan. Would any member of the public on the line like to provide comment on this item? If so, please click the raise hand button in Zoom or press *9 on your phone. Staff will display a countdown timer on the screen. Okay, I do see a hand. Can we advance Joshua to a speaking role?
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the Rental Housing Committee. Joshua Howard on behalf of the California Apartment Association. First, want to thank you again for your time and commitment to the Rental Housing Committee and working collaboratively with all stakeholders as you work to advance the implementation of the CSFRA. I want to speak tonight specifically to the work plan. And first of all, it's nice to see a work plan coming forward that does specifically identify 2 regulations that you may consider in calendar year 2023. In years past, it was often not clearly delineated what regulations might be studied, might be worked on. And usually when an agenda came out was the first time many people would learn that a regulation was even under consideration. So it is nice to see that the ratio utility billing and the tenant subtenant issue may be discussed next year. Would like to really request that on behalf of the housing providers, and this benefits renters as well, that the Rental Housing Committee commits to a process of stakeholder engagement as you develop these regulations. As you saw with the base rent concession issue, by deferring it a few months and working with stakeholders, you came to a conclusion and a recommendation that both housing providers and tenants were able to find acceptable. And that speaks really to process of stakeholder engagement and not just putting something forward and hoping to get public comment in 2 to 3 minute increments at a rental housing committee meeting. Also would like to stress the importance of transparency. It's nice to see, as I mentioned, these 2 regulations being delineated on the work plan. However, last year, I don't recall any regulations being identified on the work plan. And if other regulations other than this are to come forward in calendar year 2023, would hope that the committee would first amend its work plan so that there's notification to the community, but also that way the RHC has given direction to staff that these are regulations or issues that they want the staff to be spending their limited time working on, and would encourage you to continue working on ways to make this process more transparent, more inclusive, bring stakeholders together. Also, I would comment to you that it looks like your first 5 months are really busy with utility cost sharing and tenant subtenant issues, and might suggest that for the sake of the community, for the sake of the staff, and the sake of the RHC, spreading those issues out throughout the year versus trying to front load everything in the first 5 months of 2023. Appreciate your service on the RHC and look forward to continuing to work with you and your staff on these various issues for CSFRA. Thank you.
Thank you, Joshua. Do we have any other public comment on the work plan, draft work plan? Okay. Seeing none, I'm going to bring it back for committee deliberations and feedback. I do want to start off with, I did also, similar to our commenter, notice that we kind of packed it in on the first half of the month or first half of the year there. And my feedback on the work plan would be, I think we need to allow a little bit more time. I didn't like in the middle, let's call it late spring into summer, that we got into such lengthy meetings that we really were continuing agenda items on the regular. That didn't feel good. I didn't like having to do that. And so as I was looking over the work plan over the weekend when it came out, I felt like we should build more time into the ratio billing by 1 month and then move the tenant subtenant study session to 8/21, which then allows us to have the regulations come back to us shortly after having the study session, as opposed to having the study session, going away, coming back, having other items. Like it just, I think we're going to get compressed there. So I did kind of have that feedback as well. But what does everyone else have, if anything? Any feedback? Do y'all think I'm crazy and it just won't take that long? Vice Chair Reynolds?
I get the concern about front loading our plan or our work plan. I actually was going in a slightly different direction though, because I was thinking about how the public commenter, Mr. Howard, was correct that we didn't have the concession item on our work plan initially, and they would probably appreciate a heads up. I'm wondering if it might be worth it to add into our work plan an update about our work plan about halfway through the year, so that we could just check in. I can see how it might be. How do you say this? It might be ambitious to put everything in our first 5 months, but we don't know what most of the regulations that we had to deal with was almost immediate. And quite honestly, we never had to, we had to do this from the get-go because we were getting ready and running with this law as soon as it was put through, and then getting all that kinks out. And at some point, I anticipate it could probably die down, but then we had the pandemic, which changed the whole rental market, at least temporarily, maybe even permanently. I And so we had to do regulations based on that. And that's why concessions came up when it did, because it really was a response to the pandemic and our COVID recovery. So I am okay with keeping the front loaded, and if we have to take time to it, make that decision then, because we know that it's coming up this year. I'm happy to see the ratio utility billing services item. We've been asking for that, so I don't want to risk delaying that. And I also do believe that if staff put something on the work plan early on, that means that it did come up and they probably want to get it resolved as soon as they can. So I was thinking maybe more like we tried to do that first half year as planned, and then halfway through, seeing if we can reevaluate the work plan to see if there was like an update to it.
Committee member Almond.
Yeah, could we put on the screen that the first few months? I mean, I think having recently been chair and seeing what's happened with Nicole's chair workload, I think it is important to really evaluate how much the community and we can digest in one evening. And some of these have been very thorny issues, and they deserve our attention. And I was really happy that we postponed Treo so that tonight I really felt I was fresh enough to understand the specifics as an example. So could we look at I mean, do people have the time to take a look at those first 6 months? Because I think we might want to make a few adjustments, but I don't have it in my head.
Committee member Almond, are you asking for the attachment 1, the draft work plan itself?
The staff is pulling it up right now.
Thank you.
Thank you, Patricia.
Can everyone see my screen?
Yes. So it looks like the spring gets very dense, starting in March, I think.
That was my reaction too. I think the March meeting could end up rolling into April, and then we get really compressed.
Well, because I'm not sure what our RUBS stands for anymore. Draft regulations.
Ratio.
That's
Oh,
the
yeah,
ratio utility
yeah.
billing
I mean,
service.
my assumption is both the January 30 and March 27 could have a lot of community input. Any suggestions for handling that within the committee?
That was sort of my initial proposal, was of giving us the 4 sessions for RUBS, which also would allow us time for stakeholder meetings if we choose to do that. And then moving tenants, subtenants to August and starting that cycle in August with basically allowing it 3 meetings, because I think otherwise you're going to end up with a holiday, with the summer holiday break. You could end up with the summer holiday break after the study session, which will make it less fresh for everybody's brain.
Right. And I just wanted to make a sort of a comment about stakeholder meetings. I have a serious ambivalence, I guess I would call it, because staff puts a lot of energy into giving us all the options, and we present it to the community, and the housing providers by now are really well organized in and giving us feedback and their input and talking points. However, it would take a lot more outreach to reach the tenant community and have them show up in equal numbers. And I know I feel like I'm a broken record, but I do try to see some balance in the input that we get. And I would hate to see us get totally bogged down in that every major issue requires stakeholder meeting planning and time.
Makes sense. Committee member Grunwald, did you have comments?
Well, yeah, thanks. I think as I'm looking through this, right, I focus on the net new items, something that the items that I haven't seen before. And so I think maybe one ask I have of approaching the work plan would be working backwards from the constraints that we have, right? So we have a fixed number of staff right now. So a fixed amount of staff bandwidth. And we have a pretty good idea how much time most of these items, because we've been doing it for several years, how long they'll take to administer, and then how long they'll take in the meeting, right? So it is nice when we can, per committee member Almond's comment, I think once you get a meeting past 10 o'clock, we all start to, the quality of our attention wanes a bit. So if we looked at this from the year to say we have 12 meetings, and we have 3 hours for each of those meetings, are some of these items nice to have, right? So if we look at, for instance, the monthly activity report, should we go back to a quarterly? I think we were originally at a quarterly. Maybe it's sent as a pre-read, but we don't have to cover it necessarily in the meeting. That would save committee time in the meeting time, but not necessarily staff time. So it'd be good for me to see of the items that we know how long the budget is going to take, from an input perspective, and in the meeting perspective, typically to go over it. What could we use the information that we have to make this, to come back to the committee with where the staff might recommend taking some items out for a particular month, right? To make the meeting either fit within 3 hours or to help staff be able to put all the information together. I think we might be able for either the overview of workshops or the monthly activity report, some months, maybe just take those out and continue to compile the data, but not necessarily generate a report for it. As far as so I'd like to see that version of this, where if we almost try to predict how many appeals we might have based off prior years, or make assumptions based off prior years, and trying to get each of our meetings at 3 hours, I think that'd be good. The other piece I'd like to see is I don't know how some of these items got onto the list of interest, like for RUBS or RUBS, for instance. Maybe an item that we should address for sure, but is there a process for that case to be made, either from staff, they're hearing about something that's happening in the community, or other jurisdictions are doing something similar? Is that information given to chair? I'd like to learn more about how those items get on it. And then if it is coming from another jurisdiction, can we get a sense for how many meetings it's going to take, and how in depth that item is going to be, and how much debate there's been in other jurisdictions? That would help me know whether it's going to be something that continues over 3 meetings, or it's going to be pretty straightforward. So I guess I don't have any specific recommendations, but I'd like more information along those lines.
Thank you, Committee Member Grimwold. I will say I don't love the idea of truncating the status reports. I was super excited that we're putting more data on the status reports this upcoming quarter. So hearing that we might kind of put those into quarterlies, I think maybe goes the other direction. But that's just my thoughts on that. But Vice Chair Ramos.
So my understanding of the agenda process, so I, 2 comments and 1 question for staff. My understanding of the agendizing process is several months ago, I believe, we actually voted as part of item 8 to put ratio utility billing services on the agenda, on a future agenda. It's just taken a while for staff to research it. It's a very dense subject matter that's not familiar. You might remember it, by people calling it another name, Conservice, which is the service that is one of the ratio utility billing services. So we've been waiting for this item for a long time. Probably to be more precise, I have been waiting for this item to be heard for a while, so I really don't want to delay that. What I am curious about is the tenant subtenant master lease issue. I don't know what has brought that up. If staff could be more specific on what is the change that we are looking at, because I don't remember that being brought up by us. And generally, I've always viewed staff putting something on there because something has happened that we may want to address, or several items, several instances of a recurring event has happened that staff would want to address. I don't know if staff can get into that now.
Yeah, sure.
So that's,
Yeah.
that is a question, I guess.
So that topic has been on our list since we were confronted with one of the petition cases where the master tenant and subtenant were both companies, and there were assertions being made that were not easy to answer straight from the CSFRA text. So we just wanted to see, study this a little bit more and see if and how clarifications need to be made with that regard. So it's not a big item about how this whole relationship with tenants and subtenants needs to be, but it comes out of a petition case.
All right, now I remember probably what that petition case was. I guess to address Matthew's question about the agenda process, there is another way that city council does their agenda, not agenda process, but like they do a goal setting session. We don't cover the same amount of items that the council does, that they have to prioritize that. But so far, my understanding is that the chair could put something on the agenda, or at item 8 of our meeting, someone can bring it up and get 3 votes.
Yeah,
Put it
so
on.
our code of conduct is exactly drafted in a similar way as the city council's code of conduct.
Clarity on the RUBS item, the chair has requested that be on the agenda. I am the chair and I have requested that. So if there's any confusion on why that's on there, that is something that I did ask for. So that's why that item is there. Committee Member Grimwald.
Yeah, and that thank you for that transparency and additional information. I think maybe what I'm missing is, like, I don't actually know what's like number 3, 4, 5 on the list, or if there is a 3, 4, 5, right? So if this was for the master subtenant that you mentioned, Anki, sounds like that was one case, and we just want to get that resolved. We want to get it figured out. It doesn't feel good to have something that we haven't waited on and finalized. But are there other items or other issues that are out there that are kind of waiting, or everything that we know about that is an issue right now is on the work plan?
That's a great question. And staff is making a list during our daily and weekly and monthly work and we try to make a list of what is coming up. I think we are pretty much at the end of the list, But as you have noticed last year, this concessions issue just was a thing that just came up because of COVID situations and was not on our radar screen, say in 2018. So certain things may pop up. I really like the idea of Emily to kind of look at our work plan again in June and see if there is anything else that may have come up and plan for that equally so that there are no surprises in what the agenda items are for the rental housing committee.
So Anki, it sounds like you might have the feedback you need. Do you feel good? Do you need more from us?
So if I can summarize what I heard is that I will revise the work plan a little bit and put the master tenant subtenant topic to the second half of 2023, and then add at least in June like a revisiting of the work plan, and then I will recirculate that to everyone.
Does that sound good?
Yeah.
Collective. I'm getting some smiles and thumbs up. That seems encouraging. Excellent. Okay. Well, if Anki has what she needs, thank you to the committee and staff. We will now move to the committee and staff announcements and dates. I'll hand it back to the staff for some presentations.
Give me one moment to pull up the PowerPoint.
We need the Jeopardy music.
All right, so I will be presenting agenda item 8. So we'll look at some workshops and upcoming events. So we'll start with our Housing and Eviction Help Center. So this is held the first and third Thursday of every month. So that would be this Thursday at the Mountain View Public Library. We moved to the second floor program room. So that's where we actually started. So we're back to our original spot, just due to the library getting busier and needing more space. So we have moved back to our original spot of the second floor program room. And so we're there every first and third Thursday from 1 to 5 p.m. And people can also join online at the link mountainview.gov/eviction help clinics. And anyone who joins us can get help on various housing related topics, such as our housing programs. So we can help people apply for affordable housing or below market rate housing. We connect people with rent assistance programs. There's not many COVID rent relief applications left outstanding, but we are still helping people with those. Eviction help is also available. So tenants and landlords can learn about eviction protections in Mountain View and receive assistance with serving eviction notices and requirements, or if they've received an eviction notice, they can come and visit us. We also provide on-site through Zoom legal assistance and referrals to legal services. So we're referring people to CLESPA for legal services. And many other types of supportive services. So we have other community organizations who join us there, and people can get information on food distribution, financial assistance, mediation, homelessness prevention resources, resources for children, and much more. Okay, so upcoming office hours and workshops. So we continue to hold our virtual office hours every single Tuesday from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. So people can join us there tomorrow. During that time, you just need to register online or contact somebody from our staff if you need help making an appointment. And that website is mountainview.gov/RSP office hours. So that stands for Rent Stabilization Program office hours. We're also having a workshop this Thursday at the Housing and Eviction Help Center. So that will be between 4 and 5 p.m. And we'll be going over habitability and maintenance. And that will be in both English and translated into Spanish. We will have one of our multifamily housing inspectors there. So that's really exciting for a lot of our landlords and tenants because you get to ask very direct questions and get answers from an expert. So we encourage people to join us at the library. You can join in person or on Zoom. The other events and outreach activities that our staff is doing. So on Thursday, October 19th from 2 to 4, we have staff, our bilingual staff, doing outreach at Castro Mistral School. So they are there while CSA is doing food distribution. We also have our bilingual staff, English, Spanish, at Rangsdorf Park, where they join the outreach for diaper distribution. So they have our help center flyers, and just sort of talk to the community about CSFRA and mobile home rent stabilization and things like that. And then you can also find a large group of our staff at the Dia de los Muertos exhibit for the Monster Bash. So the Monster Bash will be at the park, Rangsdorf Park, and then the exhibit will be in the large Redwood Hall at the community center, so just across the way. So that's Thursday, that's a Saturday, October 29th, from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. So sorry, that's Saturday, October 29th, and we'll be there passing on information and just connecting with the community as well. Any questions about outreach?
I do have a question. At our housing and eviction help center, have we seen any influx of our residents in the community who are RV residents coming in for some of the assistance that we might be able to provide to them?
We have seen an increase in the last month or so of people coming into the help center for various reasons. I think a few people had petition questions last time, and that was more than we usually see there for petitions. But I haven't noticed a big increase in specifically RV related questions or looking for resources for RV tenants or owners.
I'm just curious. Any other questions from the committee? Okay. Are there any additional comments or announcements from the committee members or city staff? Vice Chair Ramos.
Just reporting back, last week, I represented our committee at the Celebration of Leaders service. Woo, celebrating us all, I guess. Lots of good food. Each committee commission or board was asked to present their accomplishments for the last year and recognize people who reached certain milestones. And I believe myself, committee member Grunwald, and committee member Pardizello are got recognized for 5 years in service of the city. So congratulations on that. Committee member Allman was with me, and we enjoyed meeting our counterparts of other committees, which was quite fun. So just reporting on that.
Excellent, and thank you for doing that as well, for presenting for us. And committee member Almond, do you have an announcement?
Well, I just wanted to say that it was a lot of fun to actually, do this in person. And it's amazing what all of the committees accomplish each year. And to put faces with names is great. And I actually wanted to also say that as part of appreciation that the city offers us every year, we get to take the opportunity of going to a Shoreline concert. And I went on Friday and I went to the Willie Nelson concert, and you get VIP parking and you get a full buffet at the Terrace Cafe, you know, and I just felt like royalty. The seats were like orchestra seats. I'm usually way up on the lawn. So anyway, I felt very appreciated, and I'm going to send a letter to the city and thank them.
Concert vaguely from my porch, but my seats were nowhere near as good as yours. Very good. Any other comments, announcements? Well, thank you both. With that, the meeting is adjourned at 8:57 p.m. The next Rental Housing Committee meeting is scheduled to be held on Monday, November 14th, 2022 at 7 p.m. Everybody have a great night, and thanks for coming out.